You're listening to Abyss Gazing, a horror podcast where we celebrate all things spooky and mental health.
I'm your co-host, Mark,
I'm your other co-host, Josh.
and we have Bella Rich with us today, actress, been in a few movies, indie movies, and we're going to talk about, was it When a Stranger Calls from 1970?
79. We'll
Yeah, something
talk.
like that.
It feels a lot older than it actually is. We'll talk about it in a little bit. But welcome.
Hiya, thank you for having me on.
Thank you. And just for the listeners, just to kind of throw this out there, Bella actually won our best performance in a feature film this past year for our film festival, Horrific Hope, for her performance in acting. And she has since done her Twitter feed with like roles is like, I feel like you have more roles than I actually have like pairs of underwear. Um, like every time I see it, it's just something new. But more recently, if you guys seen it, caught our interview with Eating-Miss-Campbell writer director Liam Reagan. She also stars in that movie, and you are just one busy lady. Let's just start there. We can just blanket statement right there. You're just a busy lady.
Yes, I guess so on that one. Up to lots of bits.
So acting was one of our selections from last year, and I was really captivated by your performance. Hence why you were able to walk away with our coveted best actor, best performance. And I'm really curious. Can you kind of talk about some of the abilities, like, so for those of you guys that didn't get a chance, that acting basically tells the story of this actress that is kind of tired of going up against these auditions and kind of being turned away. So she really kind of dives head in to this performance of like, it's like a role of a lifetime, and really kind of disappears into this role. And the film was kind of like documenting. It's not a word. Documenting her transformation into this role. Is this like a normal like performance for you, as far as like, is this how you prepare for roles?
Well, so acting was actually my first lead feature role. So it was
Oh,
it was a really new experience for me, especially something which is so emotionally intense. And obviously, when you shoot these type of stuff, a lot of the time you're shooting it backwards. So you're like, oh, all this stuff has happened, but you haven't actually done that yet. So you have to get into a real dark emotional mind space. Um, but I'm not too sure where I was going with that. But for me, I personally don't prepare myself like that for roles. Just because in the horror industry, you find a lot of the time you are doing really intense performances and your character's going through really horrific things. And before I used to do it like that, but I found at the end of these shoots, I was just being like, oh my goodness, like I feel like I've been through this. I need like 2 weeks to recover. So now I just take those moments and kind of replicate the feeling without having to dive really deep into it. I hope that made sense there.
it 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 did. And I'm also like curious, like as someone that like, everything I've seen you in is like almost exclusively acting. And so like when we were talking about bringing you on to do this episode, you talked about your passion for the genre. And probably one of my favorite podcasts currently is Talk Scary to Me, which is Daniel Harris and Scout Taylor Compton.
Yeah.
Uh, and they kind of share about like how the horror and almost acting exclusively in that genre, how it's had an effect on their own kind of mental health. Do you find that like playing in the sandbox like has affected your mental health at all as an actress?
So I think when I first got into it, a little bit, it was affecting it, because you're reading these quite horrible stories to a degree, and although a lot of the time there's a happy outcome or some sort of revenge sequence to it, it does. But in this industry, it's so supportive. Like I've been on set and been like, oh, okay, wow, no, I don't feel right good like right now, and I'll have a director be like, no, let's have a coffee, let's take a step out. So when you're surrounded by such supportive people, and this industry, and especially in the UK, is so supportive from everyone, it really helps make sure you don't let your mental health suffer. This is why I love Liam so much. I said to him before, I was receiving some harassment at one point, and he was like, right, who are these people? Let's go find them. This is what's going to happen. And he's like, we're here. He's like, don't let them make you feel like this. And that is the support that's in this industry. Everyone's very quick to be like, no, you're not feeling sad. We're helping. Let's get a coffee. So I think there's no time to let yourself fall into that because they're straight on it.
One of the things I noticed watching it was the way the story progressed and the character developed in it. It reminded me of the stories you heard of Heath Ledger becoming the Joker.
Yeah.
That's really what that was the first thing that came to mind, hearing the way they talked about him, like locking himself in a hotel room and modeling himself after Sid Vicious and all these other peoples to become the Joker. And then shortly thereafter, we know what happened. But that's kind of the way the story developed and everything in this. That's what the first thing it brought to mind.
I completely agree. I think it was kind of the way we were going with it. So the story actually did change through because of COVID. So the final third part we had to kind of make a bit more psychological. But that was a half of the inspiration for it, is that method acting and that kind of strong expectations. And I feel like probably with Heath, he had that real strong expectation to bring this perfect character, and it's a shame to see it did affect him so mentally like that. But it was quite interesting to portray that downward spiral on the screen of that character.
Yeah, and it ended up being probably one of, if not his most known roles too.
Yeah. It was
One
absolutely
of
stunning.
I had a chance to so this acting opened up our film festival for 2022, and we were Saturday morning before we were starting to talk. I was kind of hearing people as the director, like I kind of got to like float around and hear what other people were talking about, and they they were kind of talking about so there's a sequence in this movie where you're essentially faking an orgasm,
Yes.
and everyone was kind of just like, it was really uncomfortable. Like you're like, all right, it's
Yes.
like you kind of get to see the like, you know, you hear like mainstream movies, it's like, all right, well, we're gonna do like 30 seconds, maybe 60. But it's a long sequence. Um and
So funny story about that sequence.
oh gosh.
I work remotely from home. So there's times that I'm on my work computer and nothing's going on at work. So while I'm waiting on stuff to do, I'll have some of these movies on my work computer that IT can monitor at any given time.
Oh my goodness, Mark.
Oh no.
I did not get any phone calls or emails, but I'm sure somebody in the background was like, what is this dude doing?
It's like a 7-minute scene. It's long. It's long.
Yeah. It was really interesting hearing people like comment on that particular sequence, and I was like, yeah. Like I totally forgot about it, and I actually watched it with the audience the night we premiered it, and just completely forgot about that scene, and just you could kind of feel like the shift in the room, kind of been like, this is very uncomfortable right now. But I think I really like the way that like horror can make a person experience uh such, vast amounts of emotions in such a short period of time, because kind of pivoting to Eating Mrs. Campbell, which is currently making its festival run as we speak. One of the things that I think I really loved about that movie is, for those of you guys that don't know, it's a trauma movie. please go check out our episode with Liam Regan, the film's writer director, on how making the movie affected his mental health, but also at the same time, how the a suicide of a close friend also affected him. And that movie in particular is really interesting because that movie is both really funny, but also like incredibly like borderline offensive in certain angles. And, when you look at that, and I've seen you in a couple other things that I can't talk about right now, but I love just kind of the scope of how each role feels like it's personalized for the film. And Eating Miss Campbell, I'm curious. There's a vast difference in acting and Eating Miss Campbell, where Eating Miss Campbell, you kind of play this like what I would equivalent to like a valley girl, to where your voice is like knocked up a few paces, like you're really bubbly. What was it kind of like trying to find the center of that character in such a dark movie?
So she originally was supposed to be quite monotone and like just quite hard. And we tried to do it and it just wasn't coming right across. And I think I did one line, but I think I did the gee whiz, and he went, that. He went, that is what I want. And I was like, okay, I can do that. I can do that. And I was like, okay, how am I going to do this? And I spoke to an American friend of mine. I was like, what do you think of this accent? And he went, you sound like someone trying to make fun of someone from California, but an American trying to do that. And I was like, perfect. I just wanted her to be this like real trolley character, like the type of character you'd imagine behind these keyboard warriors who were just hating on everything. And that's kind of how she came to be. But she was fun. I love that role. So much fun.
Yeah, I really just want to again continue to champion that movie. Please go see that. Keep your eyes on the social medias for that one, because it's a truly fantastic role. The movie's not even 90 minutes, and like that movie just like it made me angry, it made me laugh, it made me want to cry, and it comments on so much things within its 90 like 85-minute duration. So the film's called Eating Miss Campbell. But as I mentioned earlier, you're kind of all over the place when it comes to acting. You have a couple other films that are either out slash are in post-production or are getting ready to come out. So before we jump into When a Stranger Calls, can you kind of give us a rundown of what you have coming up and when we can see them?
Oh, so we have a few film releases in January, which is I'm in Tales from the Great War. I'm also in Video Shop Tales of Terror. I'm in Sam's segment as I can't say much about the character, but she's a great character and I enjoy playing her. And they've also got Senseless coming out as well. I am actually only the woods in that, but I love that film so much, so much. I say like 3 lines in it, but it's such a good film. It's a really good representation of men's mental health as well, and watching it is quite heartbreaking, but just it's beautiful. Honestly, I'd really recommend Senseless. But as for next year, the films I'm most excited coming out later in it is definitely Incessant, which is a parasite like trauma of the ears, and it makes you go basically mental. Listening to the soundtrack on that, yeah. So it's a hard watch. That's going to be really interesting to see how that plays, because it's a really hard watch and a hard listen. And I've definitely just rambled a ton there, but those ones.
Can you repeat that last one so I can like write it down and like add it to my most anticipated list?
Incessant.
Got it. All right.
We have to go to our sound guy and be like, the sound is so good, but like it makes you feel sick. And we had to have some of it taken out because it's so sickening, the sound.
I don't know. I've seen some trippy movies this year from the horror film like DIY scene, so I'm here for it. So what we're going to be talking about, When a Stranger Calls, from 1979, not to be confused with the superbly subpar remake that they did in 2006, or its weirdly legacy type sequel, When a Stranger Calls Back from 1993. I watched all three for some reason in anticipation for this episode. So, uh,
You
yeah,
always,
When a
you
Stranger
always,
Calls.
you always over prepare though. So
This is true. I was curious, and this is about as good as it gets. They all get progressively worse. And this movie, like, I will say this movie is not necessarily a great movie. It's an okay movie. It definitely takes a little bit from like Halloween and um Black Christmas, which are two far superior films to this one.
well, what got me was seeing the actress that played, what was it, the fairy godmother or whatever in Scrooged in a
Oh
serious
yeah.
early horror role like this. That's
Carol Kane.
I had a hard time taking the movie seriously because of that. All I could see was her flying back and forth, punching Bill Murray in the face.
uh so I'm curious before like we jump into like the crux of this. Was this the first time for either one of you?
For this one, yeah.
First time watching it, or
Yes.
Yeah.
yes,
So what
I had
ticket
actually seen it beforehand, and I did rewatch it last week. Yes, got some opinions on it.
usually what ends up happening is these older ones like this, I end up recommending and he's seeing them for the first time. But this one, I didn't even realize it was the last one they did in 2000 something was a remake until he brought it up. So
Oh,
it's kind of backwards this time.
Yeah. I really like this movie. I think has a lot of good ideas, but I think it kind of kills all of its potential by the second act. By the time that you reveal who the killer is and we spend the majority of the movie with the killer, it doesn't make sense for the audience to go back to Jill Johnson after like 8 years after 8 to 10 years after the events of the prologue. Like I just I don't understand the way that this movie handles its narrative or its sense of time.
Well, it's during that time period in horror where they were kind of making up the genre as they were going, and that time period in movies where they were kind of experimenting more and more. Stuff may not have made sense in a story, but hey, we're going to try it anyways. Like the original Black Christmas, the dude living in the attic that no one knew about, things like that. The stories didn't always make sense, but they happened anyways.
good way to put it. Good way to put it. All I
But
can
that's
say
what
is I
made
can see why. Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say all I can say is I can see why in the remake they stuck with the first 10 minutes for the whole thing.
Yep.
Yeah, that's definitely something that I will say the remake has over this movie is that they keep it on a singular night in a single location. I think that is an improvement upon this. Um, but there's only so much you could do in a single location. Mark, to your point though, like that's what I think the twist of Billy being in the the addict of the is it fraternity? No, it's fraternity sorority house.
Yeah.
Um, I think that's what makes that movie such a groundbreaking thing for the early days of the slasher genre. And this feels like they tried to replicate that, but like somewhere along they were like, you know what? I don't want to make a horror movie anymore. Let's make a crime thriller.
Yeah, but at the same time, the way that whole opening sequence was done, I don't know if it was directly, but it felt like it was part of the inspiration for how they came up with the story for Scream, or at least the opening sequence.
That's fair. Uh, so just kind of like roundabout before we jump into like the crux of the conversation. just to kind of understand where everyone's at. What did everyone like think of this movie?
You go first. Me?
Yeah, go for it.
I love the first part of the movie. I understand what they were going for, but I happily could have just stopped it after 10 minutes. Is the best way to put it. I love the first part. I love the first part. The end bit, I was like, really? But I get it. I get why they went for that at the time. Experimental.
It's almost like the opening sequence, and then you get to he's been locked away and escaped, and they get to talking about, oh, we don't know how he's going to react after all these treatments. And you see him, society almost pushing him back into that, is the way it's almost made out. Almost like when you watch um, Joaquin Phoenix's Joker, society made him what he was. It kind of had that kind of feeling to the story after the first 10 minutes. It's almost like it was two separate movies almost because of the way it was done.
If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text HELP to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in the show, understand that you listening to this right now, have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us.
Yeah, and so let's talk about fear, because I feel like this movie is bookended really well, but it's that middle. I think we're all on the same page where it's kind of like once we start to explore the relationship between John Clifford and Kurt Duncan, this movie just kind of slowly falls away apart, because it's promised to be this like really like haunting, suspense horror movie, and it's not that. But I think it's really interesting when you talk about the mental health of these things, how uh you know what's the question that Kurt calls when he talks to Jill. He says, have you checked on the children, which is such a simple phrase. It's it's such a, again, it's the simplicity of it that I think is the impact. And so the film picks up like 10 years after the events of the prologue to this movie, and Jill and her husband are out having dinner, and she gets called at the restaurant from the babysitter. She's got two kids by this point. They are I would probably venture to say like 8 and 5, somewhere around that. But she gets this phone call, and it's that same exact question: have you checked on the children? And it's like no time has passed. Like, she's back in that teenager state. Like, everything that she has kind of achieved and worked for over the last 10 to 12 years has kind of just dissipated. And I think it's it's an understatement about just how easily it is to trigger someone or something back to a state of a trauma, and how easy it is to just kind of revert back to that, and how triggers look differently for everyone.
Well, it's like they talk about post-traumatic stress in soldiers, and Fourth of July and fireworks every year here in the States can set off a lot of that in veterans from the situations they were in certain wars and skirmishes. The fireworks sound so much like the events that they were in that it brings them back to it. And that's kind of what happened here.
I think it's even more than that, to where it's like, I think it's kind of a common misconception, and I don't know if you knew this, or if listeners know this or not, but for us here in the States, I think we oftentimes we talk about post-traumatic stress disorder almost being exclusive to soldiers. But when you talk about things like what Jill Johnson goes through in When a Stranger Calls, when you talk about a recovering someone that has been sexually assaulted, when you talk about someone that has been beaten or kidnapped or has been in a toxic relationship, I mean, there are multiple different types of trauma and types of triggers associated with those traumas. And trauma is such a fascinating subject to study. But I think for this one, I think that this film handles it really well, because it's an honest depiction of what it can look like. And I think for us here in the States, Mark, like, I think we register a lot more with the soldier side of it, because the United States is a very patriotic place, whereas I feel like for
Well,
Bella over.
we're
Go ahead.
also in very military oriented cities and areas too.
We are. Yeah, and you're a great example, because you live in almost like a naval
It's one of the biggest military
base.
facilities and areas in
Yeah.
the world. Yeah.
Yeah, so like for us here in the States, I think we understand that language, but for like, someone like Bella who lives over in the UK, they might not understand that. So I guess, like, what does trauma look like overseas for you guys? Like, do you guys have like PTSD with like soldiers, or does it look differently for like everyone else?
So we do have PTSD for soldiers and bits like that. I think it's quite an interesting topic to bring up, actually. So I was diagnosed with PTSD about 8 years ago, and you bring up on the triggers, and I thought I was absolutely fine for a couple of years. I had one last Monday, I think it was. I remember sitting there and I was shaking. I was like, what's wrong with me? I was like, am I just unwell? It's been a really long day. And I was like, oh my goodness, no, it's a PTSD trigger. I spent 12 months in therapy, a long time. I'll go for it. But I think there's a better way of communicating on it now. And even when I went to my partner and my friends, I was like, look, I've had a bit of a triggered episode. I was like, I just need a day to calm. I just need a week to get my head back into it. So I think for us over here, there is a real good way of being able to speak about these things and being like, oh, yeah, I'm doing this, or I've got this, or I need the space on it. So I think it was like, yeah, when you brought up that, I was like, oh, yeah, actually, those triggers come out so differently. And sometimes you don't even know when they're there. And you're just like, oh my goodness, like, am I dying? You're like, oh, wait, no, this is like a panic attack I haven't had in like 7 years.
Yeah.
I mean, it can be different for different people, like you were saying. I mean, granted, I can't speak on your experiences. I can only speak on my own, but a very hostile work environment job that I found at the job after. When we had downtime, I'd start getting paranoid and worried. What am I going to get in trouble for? Am I going to get yelled at? Because that's how the previous boss was. If we had any downtime at all, we were getting yelled at and threatened and all kinds of crap. And at the job after that, it was, I even called my boss one day. It was like Christmas Eve or something, just before a holiday, and everybody was shutting down. I'm like, I can't find any calls to do. I'm not going to be able to get anything done today. What do I do? He's like, stay out of sight and keep your head down. If a call comes up, go do it. Don't worry about it. And it was just the previous job was so hostile towards us that it was making me paranoid anytime we had downtime like that.
But it takes that time, doesn't it? It takes a long time to recover from those sorts of situations. And you think, oh, I was doing better. But something like that, as you said, during Christmas, you're like, oh gosh, I haven't got anything to do.
Yeah.
What?
You're like, am I going to get in trouble?
Yeah. And you're receiving this positiveness. You're like, what?
Yeah.
This is new and interesting. It's good. It's just it's on the recovery road, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a lot different.
Yeah, it's also really interesting how like recovery looks different for different people. I won't say that like I haven't had any, like I've never suffered from it. But like I guess like probably the closest thing I've experienced to trauma would be probably similar to Mark, where I had I was in a position of upper management and at a previous job that I had now, and when I got offered the equal type management of my current job, I had really high reservations because of all the stuff that I had. Like even like in my mind, like I still associate that like if like someone higher up than my boss needs to talk to me, it's always bad. Right. And so like, I kind of start freaking out, like my anxiety goes into overdose. And
yes,
I've really had to like learn to like work through that, not only with my wife, but like also like sitting down and like talking with my boss and like just kind of like laying out groundwork, like this is where I was, this is where I want to go for you, but like I need you to understand that like it's a journey to get from like where I was and like let go of a lot of the experiences I had, because like they're ingrained into me as like an employee and as a person that works during the day, so I understand it.
Your body will remember that like flight or fight response, and you find it will just flood through you. But it's just that kind of memory of it going, oh, we need to protect ourselves. And I think that's when that anxiety just runs through it. But it gradually gets better and better and goes, we don't need to fight or run.
Yeah, it's really interesting too, like it just kind of like stepping into like the horror world. We just a couple months ago we wrapped up the Halloween trilogy, where this whole thing was Laurie Strode.
Did we really?
We wrapped up this timeline with like Laurie Strode. Laurie Strode. We got to explore like what 40 years of holding on to trauma like actually can do to a person. What I think is great about, When a Stranger Calls is you kind of get the reverse of that, to where Jill Johnson has lived with this trauma, but she's found a way to work through it. It just happens that, that question is a trigger for her.
Yeah. Well, did she really? Because you go from the events at the beginning to 10 years later dealing with the killer to suddenly she shows up again.
Yeah, so this is my argument for that, is that I think that she did, because I feel like if had she not done it, she probably would not have gone on to live this happy life, because the very briefness that we see, she's happy, she's very bubbly, she's exactly how we remember her pre-trauma. And then we kind of get to see her revert back to that traumatic state. So like that's kind of my argument for like I think she worked herself through that. Now the film kind of doesn't give you that answer. You have to infer that. You have to make those decisions for yourself. But I think that like just saying that she does work her through trauma, like trauma doesn't discriminate. It's a lot like we were talking about with Jason David Frank. It's depression doesn't care about your financial status or your racial status or whether or not you're gay, straight, non-binary, or part of the LGBTQIA plus community. Like depression goes after everyone, and trauma can literally attack anybody. And I think that I think this film shows that, is that here you have an unsuspecting, happy-go-lucky babysitter that happens to be caught in the crosshairs of this really traumatic, just brutal double homicide, and as a result, like, experiences this. But I would argue she works her way through this, and then somehow along the way, she kind of reverts back to it because he reaches back out.
I mean, I can argue with that.
I know
How
you
many,
could.
how many instances of suicides, attempted suicides, and things like that have you heard about that you end up hearing from the people around that person saying we never knew anything was wrong, even the spouses and significant others?
That's very fair, because I'll give you that, because we also see the husband confused as crap when the call comes through, and doesn't kind of know how to respond.
And
And
he's almost condescending in nature with dealing. Like, is it going to make
yeah,
you feel better if I put the shotgun next to the bed, kind of thing, as opposed to really seeming like he's taking it serious?
yeah. And also, like, I think that's kind of a cautionary tale too, is that, like, you know, I've been married for almost 9 years. Mark, I know that you and Kate have been together a while. Bella, I don't know if you're with someone, if you guys, how long you guys have been together.
For my lovely boyfriend Kevin, nearly 3 years.
Okay, so like there's all like level of commitments, going on here. And like, at what point in that relationship do you kind of disclose past traumas? I think it's really important to do it within the, if you know that you want to be with this person, and you've kind of like established in your head that this is a long-term kind of thing, you guys have had to define the relationship conversation, then a part of that conversation also needs to talk about, like, here's also my baggage. Like, I had this traumatic event happen to me when I was 8, and it still haunts me. Or I had a run in with a violent assailant when I was in college. I witnessed a bank robbery. Whatever the event, like, being open and honest from a very young in the relationship. And that, unfortunately, is not what we see here.
Yes, that's actually very true. And yeah, I completely agree with that one. And it's so important to have that honesty and to speak about it, because you need that support system there.
And in some cases, depending on the system, it either helps or it doesn't. Like, I don't think he was really helpful in the movie, but you get somebody like my wife, we've been together 12 years, married almost 10. Um, she's super supportive, tons of stuff. I could go back to previous relationships where I was made to feel dumb over certain things that were bothering me or I had issues with and baggage. I was made to feel like I was a problem because of it. So it really varies from person to person and how they deal with it. In our case, in mine and my wife's case, due to some of the stuff that had happened to us in previous relationships and things we dealt with, it just made us kind of appreciate each other a little more.
I don't know if it's the same for men, but I find as a woman in a relationship with like, I guess not baggage, but with a few previous issues, that you tend to be made to feel that you're overly emotional, or like you shouldn't talk about things because that's in the past. Whereas, like, walking into my current partner's relationship, he's incredibly supportive, and he wants to talk about things. And like, as I said about PTSD triggers, he was like, let's chat about it, what happened. Absolutely fine. Whereas if you're with someone who's like, oh, you're too emotional, you should forget about that, it just makes your mental health so much worse. And on that note, if anyone's with someone like that, you drop them.
Yeah,
Yeah, please drop them.
it's a case of that
Yes.
whole you need to man up kind of thing.
Yeah.
For guys, and for women, they're just hysterical. It's that's those are the two stereotypes. And it's funny because I have to kind of sometimes make my wife talk about stuff. It's like, I can clearly see you're pissed off about something. You need to
But it's
talk. And she's fine. But I mean, it must be doing something good because we've been together this long. So
You hit the nail on the head, though. Like for men, it is you have to man up, and women, you're too hysterical, and it's like, how's that worked out for us? Not very well. Like men have such high suicide rates. Women are like not in great places. It's like that system does not work. And as you said, being like, "What's up?" We're like, "Well, let's talk about it." That works. That's when people are happy, when people are talking about and actually speaking about what's on their minds and easing the burden a little bit.
Yeah, I think for me, like I have to second with like Mark. Like I grew up around a lot of that culture, and that like it burdened me to the point where I was like, I didn't talk about emotions with previous partners because of that upbringing and that raising. And when I got into like my wife and I started dating, like we knew we wanted to marry one another, like right away. And I still like, I mean, it was probably like 3 years into our marriage before like I felt like comfortable enough to like start opening up. And it was like there was like this dynamic shift within our marriage that like our just our everything about it, everything about our marriage just seemed to be better because of it. And my own mental health felt like, I felt so much better, so much more at peace. And like I wasn't constantly having to try and uh just try to live up to like impossible standards. And now I'm a guy that like doesn't just really kind of give an F what people think anymore. And that's kind of like really helped my mental health from not only a point of view as a husband, but also as a point of view as a boss, someone that like oversees the content creators here at Victims and Villains. And it's also made me a better friend as well.
I mean, the weight of the world is easier to carry when it's split up among multiple people.
Yeah, what is the old saying? Heavy is the head that wears the crown.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I always come back to that scene at the end of Mean Girls where Katie breaks the crown and throws it out to the pieces. I'm like, yep, this seems fitting.
I really feel like that's your guilty pleasure movie.
Bro, Mean Girls is my favorite comedy of all time. Like it's my second favorite film of all time. So it's not a guilty pleasure. I love that movie.
It is a good movie. It's a good movie.
I've still never seen it.
What?
Yeah, I've never
That's all
seen
right,
it.
Mark. We'll hang out. I'll show it to you.
Oh no.
I'll have to stick with Just Friends. That's probably mine, but still. Just Friends is fantastic.
Just Friends. You look like you don't know what that is.
I'm trying to think.
Ryan Reynolds, Amy Smart, Anna Faris.
And it's fantastic. It's one of his lesser known movies that kind of went under the radar, and it's absolutely fantastic. You even have to watch the closing credits for Ryan Reynolds in a fat suit singing 90s R&B love songs.
It's great.
Oh wait, is this the one where he loses all the weight and goes back to his hometown and he has that lady he's looking after?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, no, yeah, I do like that one. I feel sorry for the lady though who's looking after. She just wants to live her best life and have fun.
Someone else that wants to live his best life is private detective John Clifford in When a Stranger Calls. I don't understand this character's motivation.
His whole role was painful.
Dude, so painful.
Like, why did nobody question this random dude walking around a homeless shelter with a fat flashlight and ice pick? How did nobody notice that?
It was the 70s, man. Serial killers were like a new thing. Like we didn't know then what we know now.
But still, I feel like somebody would have stopped him at some point, be like, dude, this isn't normal, even for some of these homeless people. What's the deal?
So I feel like the thing that gets me about his character is like his motivation to where like he like didn't so he was correct me if I'm wrong. He was the officer that like came to the scene of the crime in the beginning, correct?
Yeah, his motivation was that he saw what the guy could do, and he was sure he was going to stay isolated from society after that, and then he breaks free. So his motivation was, I'm not going to let him do this to anybody again. So I'm just going to off him as a private detective
E-
now.
Yeah, which kind of like bugged me because like the whole middle of this movie is just like not good. Like we're all in agreement on that, right?
Yeah.
It felt like a different movie.
Like yeah, because all right, so like it felt like they positioned the girl from the bar whose name I can't remember, but like she was like older. They're like, we're gonna position her to be our final girl, and this is gonna be the girl that Kurt's gonna woo over. And who's that on their tail? John Clifford. Like, why?
And she doesn't even become the final girl. She just
No,
becomes like the final
like.
snitch.
Do you think the detective was just deciding that every case, I'm just gonna go kill this guy and do the world a favor? Like every single one, every
Yeah.
one he just killed them. I know I'm really caught on.
Who's really the homicidal maniac in the movie?
Yeah.
Really? And the police chief is just like, I do it, but don't get caught, and don't drop my name if you do. It's like, what? Yeah, it was sketchy from the beginning to the end. Well, I should say from the beginning of the middle to the end of the middle, it was sketchy.
I want to see a backstory on him. I want to see that one. Like what he was up to. He's the maniac. He's the one who was going around killing them.
Yeah, this film. Go ahead, Mark.
So it had, and I've said this about a few movies over the years, was it felt like they had two movies. One movie they had a beginning and an end, and the other movie they just had like a basic story of what they wanted to happen, and they couldn't figure out how to begin it or end it. So they just kind of went, you know what? Let's put them together. And that's kind of what it felt like. Like they just had two separate scripts, but they didn't know how to flesh out either one completely. So they just slapped them together and made one movie.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that like this movie is like so this is my theory about what happened in this movie. This movie is like they couldn't get Carol Kane to like commit to the full thing because of like I don't know, maybe she had like other obligations with like other movies, so they shifted the narrative to focus on Clifford. And I think that's kind of where the film like really loses me. And like I had forgotten about this. Like I'd seen this movie before, but like when I came back to like rewatch it for this podcast, like I was like, all right, cool. Like first like 15, 20 minutes we're going great. They've discovered the kids, the bodies, they're horribly mutilated. Okay. And then it like fast forwards like 5 years, and then you kind of get to see like where everything is, and it's like, all right, where's Jill? Like half hour passes by, still no Jill. Where's she at? All right, film goes a little longer. Then it's like, oh hey, remember that girl from the beginning? She's back.
Yeah, that felt like poor planning. But I mean, like I said, they were being more and more experimental with scripts during that time period and the way stories played out. So you win some, you lose some. This was a loss.
It was a great base. Well, I really liked the remake. I know a lot of people did, but I really liked the remake. I thought it was a great base for it. They took the best bit. Made a fun film.
And honestly,
I'm
because
really glad you liked it.
I had seen
Sorry,
the
Bart.
remake originally first. Like I said, I didn't even realize it was a remake. So when we watched this one, I watched this one for the first time. That's what I was expecting. And then it was like, wait a second, that was the first 10 minutes of the movie. What the hell? So yeah, that didn't really
All right.
help anything.
Well, what I've learned in the past is that if you don't have anything nice to say about a film, turn to trivia.
Oh no, please! I'm so bad at trivia.
Oh, I have trivia facts pulled up here.
It usually involves Josh just like saying, "Did you know?" and then quoting a fact, and then "Did you know this too?" So you're good. You're safe.
I'll take that. You could be like, "What's bigger, a banana or an elephant?" And I'll panic and be like, "The banana."
So the film's writer and director originally shot this film as a short film called The Sitter, which essentially is the opening 20 minutes of this movie, When a Stranger Calls. However, after the huge success of 1978's Halloween, as we've alluded to in this conversation already, Walton saw the potential of expanding the short into a feature film. The script was then expanded into a feature-length film about the pursuit of villain Kurt Duncan. Mr. Fred Walton, I don't know if you'll ever hear this, but this is where you went wrong with this movie. Nobody cares about Kurt Duncan. We only care about Jill Johnson.
Jill Johnson, woo!
I mean, you got to start somewhere, I guess. Unfortunately for him, I guess it was this one.
All right, so I guess like that brings up a really good question is like, do you think that this movie works better as a short film?
Yes.
If this movie was just the first 20 minutes, does it work better?
Yes, it's not like Lights Out. Lights Out was originally a super creepy short, but it was originally short. They got enough attention that they put a full movie behind. Well, they put a halfway decent movie behind it. This one was kind of afterthought added on to a short movie. So it should have stayed a short movie.
How would you guys like to help us get mental health resources into schools, conventions, and other events? Well, now you can. Simply go to patreon.com/victims and villains for as little as $1 a month. You guys can help us get mental health resources into current and upcoming generations, educate and break down stigma surrounding mental health, suicide, and depression. And you get exclusive content that you can't get anywhere else. And you guys can tell us which Nicolas Cage movie you want us to cover, and we'll do it. All it takes to get started is to go to patreon.com/victims and villains, or simply click the link in the episode description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. Pick your tier and get started today. Yes, it's that simple. So quickly select the tier that you want and help us get hope into the hands of the depressed and the suicidal today.
All right. Did you know that Kevin Williamson paid tribute to this film in the opening scene of his film for Wes Craven's Scream? I think we talked about this already, right?
That's what I said earlier.
Well, there you go. It is real life, yeah. The opening 20 minutes of this movie is number 8 on Bravo Channel's 100 Scariest Movie Moments, as they repeatedly call it one of the scariest openings in film history. I think as it progressively goes on, and the interesting thing here about this opening segment, almost all of this trivia is about the opening segment.
Yeah.
So the opening segment, director Fred Walton gradually increased the feeling of suspense by making each subsequent phone call ring a touch louder than the previous one. They escalate from eerie to jarring and finally infuriating.
So it's funny you mentioned that about this. So completely non-related to the movie, but the same idea. Monty Python, when they had their weekly series in the UK before they blew up all over the world, they did an episode that they taped and progressively turned the sound down throughout the whole episode, with the idea being they got to the last skit and then cranked the recorded volume all the way up. So everybody's got their TVs up loud. And when you said that, it apparently whatever, I'm not sure what y'all's governing body is over in the UK for like television or radio, but they stepped in and was like, no, we're not airing this. But that's what it reminded me of with you saying that.
Yeah, Andy Kaufman did something very similar to that. When he got his like first like television special, he there's a part in the special where the you remember like when you would get like a VHS and like the TV would go like all wonky,
Yeah.
and like it usually meant that there was something wrong with the VHS. Well, that's a part of the special, and he put that in there as a prank to the audience because he's like, they'll get up and they'll think that there's something wrong with their television. But yeah, so
So along that line, they did a game, Eternal Darkness, on the GameCube, and one of the thing, it was a Cthulhu-based game, a Lovecraft game, and it would screw with your sanity. And if you let your sanity get low enough, it would like do things on the screen like it was lowering the volume of the game, or it would show like it was rebooting, and then it would tell you your game file was corrupt, all your save data was lost.
That's brilliant.
And then it would reboot right back into the game, and it did all kinds of trippy stuff like that.
so messed up.
Yeah, and I still own that game in a working GameCube.
Nice. All right, so this is the last trivia fact I have, and this is about its so for those of you guys that don't know, I mentioned this at the beginning of the podcast, but there is a sequel to this movie called When a Stranger Calls Back. It was a 1993 direct to made for television movie. It brought back not only the original film's writer and director of Fred Walton, but it also brought back Carol Kane and Charles Durling, who played Clifford in this movie, and is the first film to ever be a legacy sequel, which I think is just fascinating. It is a clever inversion of the formula from the first film. Instead of the killer phone stalking a babysitter from within the house, we have a killer pretending to be standing on the front porch outside asking for help, who then, just as the killer revealed himself to be in the house the whole time in part one, he reveals himself in part two to be inside the house where he attacks her. It's actually an extended cut of the final scene in the original where Jill is laying in bed, who she thinks is her husband. A voice emerges from the closet. Jill gets up and sees that she's been in bed with the killer, who is throwing his voice like a ventriloquist the entire time. The second movie plays on this ventriloquist idea even more elaborately. Both films are elaborate versions of the magic trick distraction and misdirection. The director, Fred Walton, makes you think the killer's in one place, but he's actually in another place the whole time.
I haven't actually seen that one, but that sounds a bit more intriguing than the second half.
It's a great twist that they don't do a whole lot with.
Oh.
So
Oh.
I feel really bad that we
theory.
Yeah.
I feel really bad that we brought you on to do such a subpar movie. I'm really sorry.
No, I'm so glad. Honestly, I was like, oh no, I bet they're gonna love this movie. I was like, okay, we have to find a nice way to phrase it. It's like, I love the first half.
In all fairness, though, usually what ends up happening is he loves the movie and I'm not too fond of it, or vice versa. So you'd have fit in just fine either way.
Perfect.
Yeah, and I think for this episode, as we're winding down, like this episode, we've done a really good job on like discussing like the impact of trauma and how it manifests into our futures. and how it affects us moving forward as individuals, and that triggers can literally come from anywhere and happen to anyone.
Yeah. We've had a lovely chat on that one. It's good. I think we've covered loads of really good things, and also remember, we don't stay with people who don't let us talk about our feelings. That's the thing we take away from this. We stay with nice, supportive people.
You got nothing else from this episode. That and it's okay to miss this as a classic horror.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, like I would recommend, especially now, like since we're like gearing up towards the Christmas season, please go watch Black Christmas and revisit John Carpenter's Halloween, because they're two like inspirations for this movie, but they are like they're done much better than this, much better.
One of the things I find amusing about Black Christmas, the original, is one of the actresses played Juliet in a very famous 70s Romeo and Juliet. And it had Margot Kidder, who went on to play Lois Lane in the first Superman movies with Christopher Reeves. So I've always found that fascinating that they were in that movie.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I know you said the inspiration on this one. I don't know if it's true, but I was reading on the film that apparently it's based off of a true story. She didn't quite survive, but
honestly, that doesn't surprise me. Because I mean, like there are well-known iconic movies that are based on like true stories. Ironically, of all things, like Freddy Krueger is like Nightmare on Elm Street is supposedly based on a true story, which is wild. There was in Japan, there was a family whose like son kept having these dreams, and basically like he was trying to stay awake because like he was convinced that if he died in his dreams, he died in real life, and lo and behold, he did.
Oh, terrifying.
Yeah, it's wild. I just want to throw this out there to anyone. Like, I know we've talked about a lot of subjects in on this episode, but our mental health resource library, which you guys can find links for it in the show notes below, has resources not only for suicide prevention, but mental health issues concerning family, postpartum depression, bullying, domestic abuse, drug addiction, and more. Please reach out if you or someone you know is going through any of the things we talked about in this episode, because as you just heard through this roundabout discussion, that you're not alone, and that you doesn't have to be the last spot for you. So please click the links in the show notes below and check that out. But speaking of that stuff and social media, where can people follow you online?
I am on Instagram and Twitter. And yes, I could not tell you my handles. I think my Twitter is Bella R. Rich, and my Instagram is AnnabellaRich.actor. But I'm very active on Twitter. Come say hi. I'll say hi back. We can post little gifts to each other.
Yeah, she's very, very active on Twitter. I think when I made the tweet about your like winning the best performance for our film festival, I think I got like a notification like 2 minutes later, and I was like, dang, all right, that was fast.
I'm either super quick or like non-existent for 24 hours, and then you'll see me retweet everything. I have like 50 retweets.
Mark, where can people find you online, my friend?
Not really on Twitter. It's I agree with Wayne on Letterkenny. Twitter is a cult. It's scary. It's a scary place. But I do paint miniatures on Instagram and post pictures of those like wargaming models and stuff because it's fun, and I do it a lot. And it's Titanium Juggernaut painting on Instagram.
I'm gonna do that.
As usual, I have to put out the disclaimer that I haven't updated it in a while, but that's because I've done like significantly better work over the last probably 6 months, and I'm trying to find a way to get better pictures so it actually shows. So
Right, I can't
Uh,
spell, so you're just gonna have to type that over. Didn't even get a suggested there. It was just nope.
Well, you guys can follow me. I'm on Letterboxd at Captain Nostalgia, and I'm over on TikTok at Gent Ghostface, Gent. And you guys can follow our parent company, Victims and Villains. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, and YouTube, and of course, wherever you guys get your podcasts from. We're also on our own podcast feed now, so just search and subscribe to Abyss Gazing wherever you guys get your podcast from. And until next time, remember that the longer you gaze into the abyss, the more the abyss gazes back into you.